A former Navy SEAL turned farmer uncovers a secret conspiracy poised to destroy his homeland. A powerful criminal cartel launches a covert assault using advanced technology and clever strategies. The hero unites the local community, turning ordinary residents into determined defenders of their homes. Secret operations and sudden ambushes transform the peaceful valley into a fierce battleground. The veteran's experience and combat skills become the decisive weapon in the fight against the enemy. Heroic feats and bloody skirmishes write a new chapter in this epic struggle. Every battle reveals the strength and unity of a community ready to fight until its last breath. This is a story of struggle, faith, and the search for truth that will leave you captivated. Stay tuned to find out how the story ends, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Many more exciting stories lie ahead. In the remote highlands of Crestwood Hills, where the rugged terrain met endless stretches of wind-swept prairies and ancient, towering pines, a modest homestead stood isolated from the modern world. Here, beneath a sky that alternated between tempestuous gray and brilliant, cloudless blue, Jonathan Mercer, known to those few who remembered his past simply as Jack, had forged a life dedicated to the land. Once a Navy SEAL, his hands had known both the cold steel of military precision and the warm, yielding soil of his newfound sanctuary. His weathered face, etched with lines of past struggles and quiet triumphs, was a canvas that bore testimony to both the scars of relentless combat and the gentle cadence of nature's rhythms. Jack's arrival in Crestwood Hills had not been born of mere chance. Driven by an unyielding desire to leave behind the relentless specter of violence and the chaos of battlefields far away, he sought refuge in the isolation that only rural America could provide. His farm, tucked away on a ridge with a commanding view of the valley below, was both a fortress and a retreat. The modest farmhouse, a converted barn with faded red paint and creaking wooden floors, served as a reminder of a time when life was simpler, a time when every day was measured by the rising and setting of the sun rather than by the ticking of a clock counting down to the next operation. Every morning, as dawn's first light spilled across the dewy fields, Jack would traverse the perimeter of his land with the measured steps of a man who had learned to read the subtle language of nature. The crunch of frost-laden grass under his boots, the rustling of the leaves stirred by a gentle breeze, and the distant call of a hawk on the wing composed a daily symphony that replaced the harsh commands and coded signals of his former life. Yet, even in this tranquil cadence, there lay an unspoken vigilance, a readiness forged from years of surviving in environments where every rustle in the underbrush might signal danger. The farm itself was a blend of rustic charm and covert resilience. Disguised behind the humble appearance of weathered barns and fields of ripening corn lay hidden caches of equipment and meticulously planned escape routes, vestiges of an era when survival depended on an unyielding attention to detail. Jack had spent countless hours after the harvest and before the first frost reinforcing old structures, installing discreet yet sophisticated security measures that he had once deemed unnecessary during peacetime operations. Even as he tilled the earth and tended to livestock, his mind was alert to every shift in the wind, every unusual sound echoing off the distant ridges, a remnant of instincts honed on covert missions in hostile territories. However, as the months wore on, an unsettling rumor began to drift through the neighboring communities, carried on whispered conversations and wary glances. Reports emerged of a clandestine syndicate operating just beyond the borders of Crestwood Hills, an organization that, while masquerading as legitimate business interests and local entrepreneurs, was rumored to have ties to international criminal networks. This group, which local gossip dubbed the Nova Consortium, had been making subtle moves in the region, acquiring tracts of land, manipulating local politics, and, most alarmingly, conducting operations that bore an uncanny resemblance to military tactics. Their presence, though not overtly violent at first, stirred a sense of impending doom in the hearts of those who remembered the days when the world was a battleground of shifting alliances and hidden wars. Jack's instincts, ever sharp from years spent in hostile environments, sensed that his peaceful refuge was about to be tested. On an early autumn morning, while surveying his fields at the break of dawn, he noticed unfamiliar tire tracks near the northern boundary of his property, tracks that were not the result of his own vehicles or those of his neighbors. The impressions in the soft earth were deep and deliberate, hinting at the passage of heavy, well-maintained machinery. There was no mistaking the signature of a professional force. His loyal border collie, a keen and steadfast companion named Argos, was immediately alert, his ears perked and his body tense as if anticipating a storm. The silent communication between man and dog spoke of a shared understanding. The harmony of nature had been disturbed. Without a word, Jack retreated to the relative safety of his farmhouse, his mind racing as he pieced together the implications of this intrusion. Memories of covert operations and high-stakes confrontations flooded back in a torrent of vivid recollections, the adrenaline, the meticulous planning, the razor-thin margin between life and death. Yet, despite these turbulent memories, he resolved to maintain the delicate balance between his old life and his present existence. There was a time when he could have mobilized a tactical response with a precision that had saved countless lives. Now, his response had to be measured, clandestine, and calculated with the same care he had once applied to disarming an explosive device in the dead of night. As days passed, the subtle incursions became bolder. Unmarked vehicles were seen meandering along the county roads, and an uneasy tension began to settle over the rural communities. Local farmers spoke in hushed tones of strange meetings held at dusk in deserted parking lots, of men in dark suits exchanging documents that never made it into public records. In these moments of uncertainty, Jack became an unintentional sentinel, his farm transforming into a microcosm of the larger struggle between lawlessness and order. The Nova Consortium, though shrouded in corporate veneer, was a tangible threat, and every new sign of their presence was a reminder that the tranquility of rural life was a fragile illusion. In response, Jack methodically inspected every inch of his property. He adjusted the concealed cameras he had installed months earlier, ensuring that no movement would go unnoticed. The old radio system, a relic from his military days, hummed quietly in a corner of the barn, a constant link to a network of contacts who still operated in the shadows of modern society. These were individuals who, like him, had traded the chaos of warfare for the hope of rebuilding lives, yet remained ever ready to act should the situation escalate. Jack's nights, once filled with the gentle hum of crickets and the rustling of wind through the pines, now carried a subdued vigilance. Every shadow, every flicker of movement in the periphery of his vision, was meticulously noted in a logbook kept near his weathered desk. This journal, written in a deliberate and methodical hand, was not only a record of events but also a testament to the enduring spirit of a man who refused to be caught off guard by fate. Throughout the long, restless nights, the memories of past missions, of high-stakes extractions and clandestine operations in hostile territories, served both as a burden and as a source of strength. Jack recalled the faces of comrades who had fought by his side, the silent understanding that had bound them together under fire, and the solemn promise that had driven them to protect those who could not protect themselves. In this quiet corner of America, far from the neon-lit battlefields of distant lands, he had discovered a purpose anew. The land, with its rugged beauty and timeless resilience, offered him a chance to rebuild not just his own life, but the lives of those around him who had long suffered under the weight of unchecked criminal ambition. Even as he labored in the fields by day, nurturing the soil and coaxing life from the barren ground, the specter of the Nova Consortium loomed ever larger. The first hints of their calculated presence were as subtle as a whisper in the wind, yet as undeniable as the shifting of tectonic plates. In the distant valleys, where the horizon met the heavens in a seamless embrace, signs of their encroachment began to manifest in the form of abandoned structures and hastily erected barriers. It was as if an unseen hand had reached out to alter the very fabric of the land, a manipulation that threatened to undermine the natural order and the delicate balance of life in Crestwood Hills. Amid these unfolding events, Jack's resolve hardened. He recognized that his role as a simple farmer was about to collide with the turbulent forces of a world that had once been his battleground. The quiet dignity of his past was not something he could easily set aside, it was woven into the very essence of his being. Even as he sought to cultivate a life of peace, the memories of covert operations and the unyielding discipline of a Navy SEAL were inseparable parts of who he had become. It was a dual existence, one foot planted firmly in the serenity of rural life and the other in the uncharted territories of conflict and survival. As the first leaves of autumn began to fall, swirling in the crisp air like embers of a long-forgotten fire, Jack prepared for the inevitable confrontation. The once peaceful cadence of his daily routine was now punctuated by a sense of foreboding urgency. Every morning's patrol, every careful inspection of his hidden defenses, was a silent declaration of his readiness to confront whatever threat might emerge from the shadows. In the deep silence of the early hours, as the world around him still slept, he meticulously reviewed every detail of his security measures. Each motion-activated sensor, every strategically placed vantage point, was a line of defense against an enemy that had yet to reveal itself fully. In these moments of solitary reflection, Jack's thoughts wandered back to the years he had spent in the crucible of combat, times when split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. The lessons learned in the most inhospitable corners of the globe were now his arsenal in the quiet war for the soul of his land. His determination was unyielding, even as he labored with his hands in the earth. His mind remained sharp, attuned to every nuance that could signal the approach of the Nova Consortium's operatives. The duality of his existence, of a gentle farmer by day and a battle-hardened warrior by necessity, formed the crux of his inner strength. It was in this state of constant preparedness that Jack found a peculiar kind of solace. The solitude of his farm, far removed from the relentless turmoil of his past, offered a temporary reprieve. Yet, he was acutely aware that the isolation he cherished was fragile, that the winds of change could carry with them the seeds of unrest. Each day was a balancing act between the simple joys of rural life and the unyielding demands of vigilance. The tranquility of the valley was an ephemeral veneer, beneath which lay the potential for chaos, a truth that Jack had come to accept with a sober resignation. Thus, beneath the vast expanse of a changing sky, in a landscape defined by both its breathtaking beauty and its latent dangers, Jack Mercer prepared for what lay ahead. With a measured heart and an unwavering determination, he stood as both guardian and cultivator, a man whose past and present converged on the soil of Crestwood Hills, where every breath of wind carried the promise of renewal and the threat of conflict alike. As the long days of summer gradually yielded to the brisk onset of early autumn, the land of Crestwood Hills began to exhibit signs of transformation. The once lush green meadows started to adopt a golden hue, and the crisp air carried with it the bittersweet scent of change. Jack Mercer, now more alert than ever, continued his daily patrols along the periphery of his expansive property. The quiet determination etched into his every step belied a mind still sharpened by decades of covert operations. In the soft glow of the early morning light, he moved with a deliberate grace that came from years of training, a seamless blend of vigilance and the natural cadence of rural life. Jack's routine had become a meditative ritual, a deliberate exercise in scanning every inch of his surroundings for any hint of intrusion. The distant rumble of engines on county roads, the irregular chirping of crickets in the twilight, and even the rustle of wind through dry cornstalks had all taken on new significance. To the untrained eye, these were mere fragments of daily existence, but to Jack, each sound was a piece of a larger puzzle that might reveal the clandestine operations of the Nova Consortium. Their presence, though still shrouded in mystery, was beginning to cast a long and ominous shadow over the peaceful rhythms of the valley. Every evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jack would settle into a quiet corner of his farmhouse, a space that served as both a sanctuary and a war room. He would unfurl a sprawling map of the region across a weathered wooden table, its surface marked with countless annotations and notes accumulated over years of surveillance. Pinpricks of red and blue ink detailed everything from the precise locations of suspicious vehicle tracks to the estimated arrival times of unmarked convoys. This map was his guide, a tool honed during his military days and repurposed for a new kind of battle, one fought not with brute force alone, but with careful observation and strategic foresight. The security measures he had installed around his property, once seen as relics of a bygone era, now took on a vital importance. Hidden cameras, motion sensors, and a network of discrete alarms had been painstakingly positioned to cover every possible approach. These devices, while simple in their operation, formed a formidable barrier against intruders. The old radio system, patched together with parts salvaged from retired equipment, crackled softly in the background as Jack maintained constant contact with a few trusted allies who still operated in the shadows. They were fellow veterans and discreet operatives scattered across the region, men and women who had once been united by duty and shared sacrifice, now bound by the unspoken promise of protecting a land that had become a beacon of hope in a world teetering on the brink of chaos. The tension in the air grew more palpable with each passing day, a silent reminder that the Nova Consortium was not a mere figment of local gossip but a real and present danger. Rumors of their activities had evolved into verified sightings, discreet meetings in abandoned barns, the quiet exchange of encrypted messages over secure channels, and the unsettling appearance of unfamiliar personnel in the nearby towns. Each incident, though seemingly isolated, wove a tapestry of intrigue that demanded Jack's constant attention. The threat was no longer confined to whispered speculation, it had begun to take shape, edging closer to the heart of his sanctuary. One crisp evening, while the moon hung low over the rugged hills, Jack observed an unusual phenomenon from his vantage point near the eastern boundary of his property. A series of flickering lights danced in a pattern that was both deliberate and disconcerting, as if someone had orchestrated a signal to communicate silently across the darkened landscape. His seasoned eyes, accustomed to reading the subtlest cues in the night, immediately recognized the pattern as something more than a random anomaly. It was a coordinated effort, perhaps a test or a reconnaissance mission by the consortium's operatives, probing the limits of his defenses and gauging the response of the local community. With a practiced calm, Jack retreated to a concealed alcove within his barn, where he had set up a temporary command post complete with multiple monitors and a makeshift communication array. In the dim light, he methodically analyzed the data streaming in from the hidden cameras. The flickering lights were indeed confirmed to be artificial, produced by portable devices that emitted intermittent bursts of energy. These devices were not commonly seen in the area, and their precise deployment suggested that whoever was behind them was no amateur. Every detail, from the timing of the bursts to the angles at which the light swept across the fields, was scrutinized with the same intensity that he once reserved for assessing enemy movements on hostile battlefields. As he pieced together the fragments of this unsettling mosaic, Jack's mind raced back to the days of his service. The memories of covert reconnaissance missions in hostile territories, the adrenaline of tracking elusive targets, and the weight of responsibility that came with each split-second decision flooded his thoughts. He recalled the long nights spent poring over maps and satellite images, the hushed conversations held in safe houses, and the ever-present tension that lingered like a shadow over every operation. It was a stark reminder that no matter how far he had retreated into the quiet life of a farmer, the specter of conflict was never truly far away. In the days that followed, the subtle signals escalated. Unmarked trucks began to appear more frequently on the outskirts of the valley, and discreet meetings took place under the cover of darkness at locations that had long been abandoned. The local community, initially unaware of the brewing storm, started to experience a palpable shift in the atmosphere. Neighbors exchanged wary glances and spoke in hushed tones about strange visitors and unexplained occurrences near the old industrial site on the outskirts of town. Despite these murmurs, few could grasp the full extent of the threat. Only Jack, with his razor-sharp instincts and unwavering resolve, understood that the Nova Consortium was orchestrating a calculated incursion into the very fabric of his rural haven. Throughout these tumultuous times, Jack remained a steadfast pillar of resolve. He continued to work his land during the day, his hands skillfully tending to the earth as if to reaffirm that life, in its most fundamental form, must go on. Yet, every furrow plowed into the rich soil, every seed sown with hope, was an act of quiet defiance, a declaration that the sanctity of Crestwood Hills would not be easily violated. The farm was not merely a piece of property, it was a symbol of resilience and self-reliance, a testament to the enduring spirit of those who refused to be subjugated by the forces of chaos. In the evenings, as the temperature dipped and the valley was enveloped in a serene, star-studded sky, Jack's thoughts often drifted to the delicate balance between vigilance and normalcy. He recognized that while overt acts of resistance could provoke the enemy, subtlety was the key to preserving the fragile equilibrium that had allowed him and his neighbors to thrive. The duality of his existence, as both a humble cultivator of the land and a battle-hardened veteran, became increasingly pronounced. His days were spent nurturing life and hope, while his nights were dedicated to the silent war of intelligence gathering and defensive strategizing. One night, as a particularly biting wind swept through the valley and rattled the window panes of his farmhouse, Jack received an unexpected transmission over his old radio. The message was brief and coded, a series of numbers and words that, once deciphered, revealed a critical piece of information. The Nova Consortium was planning a large-scale operation that would target several strategic points in the region, including the neighboring town of Westbridge. The implications were dire. Westbridge was a community much like Crestwood Hills, a tight-knit assembly of families who had long relied on the promise of safety and mutual support. The thought of their quiet existence being upturned by a shadowy force fueled a quiet fury in Jack's heart. He knew that the encroachment of the consortium was not merely about territorial expansion or the pursuit of profit, it was an assault on the very idea of community and the simple dignity of rural life. In the days that followed, Jack mobilized a network of contacts and fellow veterans. Each one discreetly embedded in various communities across the county. They convened in secret, pooling their collective knowledge and experience to forge a plan that was both tactical and humane. Their strategy was not to wage an all-out war, but to build a resilient, self-sustaining network of local defenses, an intricate web of surveillance, rapid response teams, and community education initiatives designed to empower ordinary citizens against an unseen adversary. The plan was as much about reclaiming control as it was about restoring the fragile balance that had once defined the region. Jack's leadership during these trying times was characterized by a quiet determination that resonated with those around him. He became the linchpin of an emerging movement that sought to harness the latent power of community spirit and transform it into a formidable bulwark against external threats. Under his guidance, the local farmers began to undergo rudimentary tactical training, learning to recognize the subtle signs of intrusion and to respond swiftly to any indication of danger. This was not a militia in the conventional sense, but rather a loose network of neighbors united by a common purpose, a collective understanding that the strength of their bond could serve as the ultimate defense. As the autumn days shortened and the first frosts began to lace the edges of the fields, the air grew thick with anticipation. The Nova Consortium, sensing that their covert maneuvers were no longer unnoticed, escalated their operations. More sophisticated surveillance equipment, encrypted communications, and even hired specialists in counterintelligence began to surface in the reports that reached Jack's ears. Yet, with every new development, his resolve only strengthened. The land itself, its rugged beauty and untamed spirit, seemed to imbue him with a sense of purpose that transcended the looming threat. The farm was his sanctuary, his fortress, and now, the nucleus of a burgeoning resistance that would prove to be as enduring as the ancient hills that cradled it. In the midst of this tension, subtle acts of defiance began to punctuate daily life. Unmarked packages containing advanced communications gear and encrypted devices found their way to Jack's doorstep, delivered through channels known only to a few trusted allies. These tools, relics of a past era repurposed for a present crisis, became the silent heralds of a new chapter in the struggle for Crestwood Hills. Each new piece of equipment was meticulously integrated into the existing network, further tightening the web of surveillance that stretched across the valley. It was a silent arms race, fought not with the clamor of gunfire but with the quiet persistence of vigilance and strategy. As the nights grew longer and the crisp air carried whispers of an approaching storm, Jack's thoughts turned toward the future. He envisioned a community where every resident, be they farmer, shopkeeper, or schoolteacher, would be a guardian of their own destiny, a sentinel standing against the tide of encroaching darkness. The blueprint for this future was drawn in the meticulous lines of his maps, in the coded transmissions exchanged over crackling radios, and in the silent resolve of a man who had once danced on the knife's edge of life and death. It was a future where resilience would be forged not in the heat of battle, but in the quiet determination to reclaim and protect the values that defined their way of life. In the unfolding chapters of that autumn, as the land shifted and the skies darkened with the promise of a storm, Jack Mercer remained a steady, unyielding force. His dual identity, as a simple farmer and a battle-tested veteran, merged seamlessly into a single purpose: to safeguard the soul of Crestwood Hills against the relentless encroachment of a shadowy enemy. With every passing moment, the stakes grew higher, the threat more palpable, and the resolve of the community ever stronger. In that fragile balance between light and darkness, between the quiet promise of dawn and the encroaching gloom of night, Jack's legacy was being written, one measured step at a time, one act of defiance against the tide of chaos. One heartbeat echoing in the vast, enduring silence of the land. As winter crept over Crestwood Hills with a relentless chill, the landscape transformed into a stark yet beautiful tapestry of frost-kissed fields and barren, snow-dusted pines. The valley's once vibrant hues had surrendered to a monochrome canvas, where every breath of wind carried the promise of both renewal and forewarning. In this austere environment, Jack Mercer, whose quiet determination had already forged a network of vigilant neighbors, found his world rapidly evolving from an isolated retreat into a complex battlefield where nature's severity mirrored the harsh realities of modern conflict. During these frigid days, the threat posed by the Nova Consortium deepened. Their movements became bolder and more coordinated, and the once subtle signals of their presence grew into unmistakable indicators of a calculated campaign. Unmarked, heavily armored vehicles began to appear along the icy roads, their lights piercing through the dark winter nights like sinister beacons. Jack's intuition, sharpened by years of military training and hardened by the relentless demands of rural survival, told him that the enemy was preparing for something significant, a large-scale maneuver designed to destabilize the region's delicate balance. The seasoned veteran spent long hours in the dim glow of his farmhouse's single lamp, poring over detailed maps and satellite images. Every inch of the territory was meticulously analyzed, every anomaly scrutinized for signs of an imminent incursion. The map that once served as a simple record of suspicious movements had now transformed into a strategic blueprint. It was adorned with intricate notations, arrows, and coordinates, a silent testament to the convergence of his past military expertise and his current duty as protector of the land. Amid the quiet hum of the heating system and the occasional creak of the wooden floors settling under the weight of winter, Jack's mind raced as he connected dots that no one else seemed to notice. In this period of escalating tension, the Nova Consortium's operations had reached an unprecedented level of sophistication. Reports arrived from trusted contacts: a retired intelligence officer living in a neighboring town, a local mechanic whose repair bills had suddenly spiked with expenses for high-end surveillance components, each contributing pieces to a disturbing puzzle. The consortium was not merely a criminal enterprise, it was a meticulously organized network that exploited every available resource, using both legal loopholes and underground channels to further its agenda. The remnants of Jack's old life reawakened with every piece of intelligence, stirring memories of covert operations and shadowy engagements that had once defined his existence. Against the backdrop of this mounting crisis, Jack mobilized his ragtag coalition of like-minded individuals. Former comrades, local farmers, and community leaders, united by a shared conviction that their peaceful existence was under threat, began to gather in secret. In barns repurposed as makeshift command centers, in abandoned outbuildings that whispered of long-forgotten times, they forged a network of resistance. Their strategy was not one of overt confrontation but rather of intelligent, measured preparedness. Each meeting was held with the quiet urgency of a war room, each plan devised was a careful blend of military precision and the ingenuity born from living in a community that prized its independence. The winter nights were long and unforgiving, yet they also brought a unique clarity that sharpened every sense. The biting cold and the stillness of the snow-laden landscape provided Jack with an unexpected advantage. Every sound was amplified, every footstep on the crunchy frost became an audible alert to a possible threat. In the silence of these nights, the normally imperceptible signals of the enemy's approach, the crunch of tires on frozen gravel, the muted thud of heavy boots, were as unmistakable as distant echoes of past battles. It was during one such night, when the moon cast an ethereal glow on the pristine snow, that Jack's instincts proved prescient. A subtle but deliberate disruption in the natural soundscape, a series of rhythmic thumps followed by a low, mechanical drone, alerted him to the presence of a reconnaissance team scouting the perimeter of his property. Jack moved with a measured caution that belied the rapid pace of his thoughts. He traversed the frost-covered fields with the silent agility of a predator, each step calculated to minimize the crunch of snow underfoot. The cold did little to diminish the heat of his resolve. His every action was infused with the precision of a seasoned operator. His movements were not just those of a man tending a farm but of a guardian prepared to defend his sanctuary at any cost. At the edge of a copse of snow-laden pines, he paused to assess the situation, drawing on memories of tactical maneuvers from a life steeped in covert operations. The moment was a fleeting one, yet it encapsulated the essence of his transformation, from a man seeking solace in the quiet rhythms of nature to a vigilant sentinel standing against the encroaching tide of organized chaos. Inside the farmhouse, the isolation that once provided solace now felt more like a fortress under siege. The interior, with its faded photographs and relics of military insignia, bore silent witness to the passage of time and the evolution of its master. Jack's personal journal, a chronicle of every incident, every anomaly, and every calculated risk, grew thicker with each passing day. The detailed entries captured not only the tangible events but also the intangible shifts in the mood of the land, the subtle change in the expressions of his neighbors, and the growing sense of urgency that permeated the community. The written word became both a record and a ritual, a way for Jack to reconcile the dual aspects of his existence, the quiet life of a farmer and the relentless vigilance of a veteran. As the winter deepened, the consortium's strategy grew increasingly audacious. Their operatives began to exploit local resources, blending into the community under the guise of legitimate business ventures. New faces appeared in town, outsiders with polished accents and tailored suits, claiming to represent reputable enterprises. Yet, beneath the veneer of professionalism lay a web of deceit and clandestine operations aimed at infiltrating the very heart of the community. Local businesses began receiving unsolicited offers and suspiciously favorable terms for property acquisitions, a silent yet insidious attempt to erode the independence that had long defined Crestwood Hills. Jack, ever the watchful guardian, noted these developments with a mounting sense of urgency. Every new arrival, every unexplained change in the local economy, was meticulously logged in his journal and cross-referenced with data gleaned from his network of contacts. The patterns that emerged painted a grim picture. The Nova Consortium was preparing not just for a localized disruption but for a systematic takeover of the region, a strategy that would see their influence extend far beyond the borders of Crestwood Hills. This realization galvanized the community into action. Quietly, without fanfare, the seeds of resistance were sown. Neighbors began to share information more openly, pooling their knowledge and resources to create a collective shield against the encroaching threat. Under Jack's steady guidance, the resistance took on the characteristics of an intricate symphony of coordinated efforts. Every member of the community played a part: farmers, shopkeepers, retired law enforcement officers, and even local schoolteachers, each contributing in their own way to the defense of their shared home. The plan was one of subtle, strategic fortification rather than overt militaristic aggression. They organized regular patrols, established communication protocols, and set up observation posts in inconspicuous locations. In a manner reminiscent of an elaborate chess game, every move was calculated to anticipate the consortium's next step, every decision weighed against the risk of exposure and the potential for collateral damage. The days blurred into nights and back again, with time measured not by the chime of a clock but by the slow yet relentless progress of snow accumulating on the ground. In this environment, the stakes were raised to a level that transcended individual ambition. The very identity of the community, its values, its traditions, and its way of life, hung in the balance. Jack's role as the reluctant hero, a man who had once sought refuge in the simplicity of rural life, had evolved into that of a unifier and a protector. His eyes, reflecting both the wisdom of his years and the fire of unyielding resolve, surveyed a landscape that was as much a battlefield as it was a home. Even as the consortium's maneuvers intensified, the people of Crestwood Hills found strength in the solidarity forged through shared adversity. The winter, with its bitter cold and long nights, became a crucible in which the character of the community was tested and ultimately strengthened. The daily rituals of tending to livestock, repairing weather-beaten fences, and harvesting the scant winter yield were interwoven with clandestine meetings, intelligence exchanges, and the constant reinforcement of defensive measures. In this fusion of pastoral life and covert strategy, every act of ordinary labor assumed an added dimension, a reaffirmation of the community's commitment to its survival. In the quiet aftermath of another long, dark night, as the first pale hints of dawn began to break over the frost-covered horizon, Jack Mercer stood alone at the threshold of his farmhouse. His silhouette, framed by the soft light of an awakening day, evoked both the vulnerability of man and the unyielding strength of purpose. The challenges that lay ahead were daunting, and the path forward was fraught with uncertainties. Yet, within the depths of his being, there resided an unshakable belief in the resilience of those he had come to call his family. The harsh winter, with all its trials and tribulations, had not dimmed the light of hope that burned within him, rather, it had forged that hope into a weapon as potent as any he had once wielded in the chaos of battle. Thus, beneath a sky of pale, shifting colors and amid a landscape transformed by the cold hand of winter, the saga of Crestwood Hills continued to unfold, a story of defiance, unity, and an unyielding determination to preserve the sanctity of home against forces that sought to tear it asunder. In the silent language of the land, in the measured steps of a man who had once danced with danger, the narrative of survival was etched indelibly into the frost-covered earth, a legacy of courage that would endure long after the winter had passed. As the relentless grip of winter began to loosen and the first tentative signs of spring emerged over Crestwood Hills, the landscape transformed once again into a canvas of renewal and cautious optimism. The barren fields, which had been locked in a silent, frost-bound slumber, now slowly yielded to tender shoots and the muted green of emerging life. In the midst of this seasonal rebirth, Jack Mercer, the stoic guardian of the land, found his determination renewed by both nature's resilience and the ever-present specter of looming conflict. His days, once marked solely by the somber duties of surveillance and preparation during the harsh winter months, now assumed a dual cadence, one of quiet restoration during daylight and vigilant defense under the cloak of twilight. In the early light of a crisp morning, when the horizon blushed with the promise of a new day, Jack could be seen methodically inspecting the revitalized fields and the reawakened contours of his property. The thawing earth, soft and pliant beneath his well-worn boots, invited him to rediscover the intimate details of the land he had come to cherish. Each furrow in the soil told a story of battles fought in silence and victories earned through sheer perseverance. Even as nature stirred with life, the veteran's eyes remained alert to the subtle indicators of the Nova Consortium's persistent interest in the region. He noted with a measured calm that the blossoming of the wildflowers and the return of migratory birds could easily mask the clandestine movements of an enemy determined to exploit any vulnerability. During these early spring days, the local community began to reassemble. Emerging from the long, isolating months of winter with a collective sense of cautious hope. Neighbors, who had huddled in their homes against the bitter cold, now gathered to discuss the changing seasons and the gradual return of prosperity. Yet, beneath the surface of these cordial interactions lay a shared awareness of the threat that loomed like an uninvited shadow. Jack, aware of the delicate balance between nature's rebirth and the potential for external interference, continued to uphold his dual roles with unwavering discipline. By day, he was the humble farmer tending to crops and restoring fences battered by the winter's assault. By night, he was the vigilant sentinel, his mind sharply attuned to every whispered hint of a clandestine operation orchestrated by the consortium. The farm itself began to echo with the sounds of renewal, a symphony of chirping birds, the gentle rustle of leaves stirred by a mild breeze, and the distant hum of a tractor beginning its rhythmic work as the thawed earth prepared for planting. Yet, intermingled with these natural melodies were the more mechanical sounds of surveillance equipment being recalibrated, the soft click of switches in the hidden security panels, and the low, persistent murmur of encrypted transmissions from trusted contacts dispersed across the county. Jack's makeshift command center, tucked away in a repurposed shed near the eastern edge of his property, had been upgraded with new tools that combined the latest in covert technology with the enduring reliability of time-tested devices. The flickering monitors, which once displayed only sporadic images of intruders in the dead of night, now offered a continuous stream of data, each pixel a potential clue to the consortium's next move. During one particularly luminous morning, as the dew clung to the freshly sprouted grasses like delicate beads of hope, Jack detected an anomaly in the periphery of his surveillance grid. A series of short-range infrared bursts, uncharacteristic in their timing and frequency, flickered across the screen. The pattern was neither random nor benign, it was an unmistakable sign of deliberate reconnaissance, a test of his defenses by the enemy. The realization sent a shiver through his seasoned nerves, as it harked back to memories of covert operations in distant lands where even the slightest deviation in enemy behavior could herald the onset of an ambush. With methodical precision, he activated a series of countermeasures, rerouting the live feed to a secondary monitor and cross-referencing the incident with historical data stored in his extensive logbook. Every detail, from the angle of the infrared bursts to the precise moment of their occurrence, was meticulously recorded. It was a silent dialogue between adversaries, a game of signals and counter-signals that had been refined over decades of conflict. As the days advanced, Jack's network of trusted allies began to reconvene with renewed urgency. They met under the guise of community projects and seasonal celebrations, their true intentions masked by the normalcy of everyday life. In the dim light of an old community barn, which had long served as a neutral ground for neighborly gatherings, the group discussed the increasing sophistication of the Nova Consortium's operations. Their conversations, layered with the weight of shared history and unspoken commitment, wove together both strategy and hope. They debated the merits of a direct confrontation versus a more subtle campaign of civil resistance, a campaign that would rely on the strength of their collective unity, the power of well-organized intelligence, and the deep-rooted determination to preserve the heritage and independence of Crestwood Hills. In this evolving landscape, the seasonal transition brought with it not only the promise of agricultural bounty but also the inevitability of strategic recalibrations. The consortium, it seemed, had not rested during the winter, rather, they had adapted, recalibrated, and now sought to exploit the vulnerabilities that often accompany change. Their operatives, disguised as itinerant businessmen and opportunistic developers, began to make overtures that were too conveniently timed to coincide with the planting season. They offered contracts and partnerships that, while lucrative on the surface, carried with them the seeds of subversion, a subtle effort to infiltrate the local economy and bend it to their will. Local officials, many of whom had been unwittingly seduced by the allure of modernization and prosperity, found themselves entangled in a web of corruption that threatened to undermine the very foundation of the community's resilience. Jack, ever the vigilant guardian, saw through these veiled advances with a clarity born of experience. He recognized that the true battle was not fought solely on the fields or through clandestine operations, but within the hearts and minds of the people who depended on the integrity of their homeland. In the soft glow of a late afternoon, as the sun began to dip behind the distant ridges, he took time to walk among the villagers. His presence, humble yet unmistakably commanding, served as both reassurance and a quiet reminder of the stakes at hand. With every handshake, every nod of acknowledgement, he conveyed a silent promise, that no matter how insidious the threat, the spirit of Crestwood Hills would not be extinguished. The interplay between nature's rebirth and the inexorable march of danger provided a stark contrast that defined the rhythm of those spring days. The once isolated fields, now awash in the vibrant hues of wildflowers and fresh green, became a living metaphor for resilience and renewal. Yet, beneath this veneer of beauty, the undercurrents of conflict pulsed steadily. Jack's nights were punctuated by the persistent monitoring of data streams, the hushed conversations with operatives scattered like secret sentinels throughout the county, and the quiet preparation for any eventuality. Each dusk brought with it a renewed commitment, a silent vow that he would stand as an immovable bulwark against the encroaching tide of the Nova Consortium. In the midst of these efforts, an unexpected development added a new dimension to the struggle. A long-forgotten ally, once thought to have vanished into the annals of military lore, re-emerged with critical intelligence. This figure, a former intelligence analyst with a storied past of deciphering encrypted communications in the most hostile environments, provided a trove of documents and intercepted messages that hinted at a large-scale maneuver by the consortium. The revelation, delivered through secure channels and shrouded in urgency, confirmed that the enemy planned to launch a multi-pronged operation aimed at destabilizing not only Crestwood Hills but also several neighboring communities. The intelligence painted a picture of an enemy that was as methodical as it was ruthless, a foe willing to sacrifice everything in pursuit of power and profit. With this newfound information, Jack convened an emergency meeting with his most trusted confidants. In the quiet confines of the community barn, beneath the soft glow of oil lamps and the weight of shared determination, the group painstakingly analyzed every detail of the intercepted communications. Their discussions were measured, laced with both skepticism and resolve, as they crafted a plan to counter the impending threat. The strategy that emerged was multifaceted, combining elements of traditional defensive posturing with innovative tactics designed to outmaneuver an adversary that relied on both brute force and subterfuge. They agreed that, while the path ahead would be fraught with danger, the unity of their community and the strength of their shared values would be their greatest assets. As the spring days lengthened and the warmth of the sun grew bolder, the renewed vigor of Crestwood Hills stood in stark contrast to the calculated machinations of the Nova Consortium. Jack, who had long come to embody the spirit of both the land and its people, continued to move between the roles of nurturer and defender with a grace that belied the complexity of his double life. In the golden light of late afternoons, as he surveyed the blooming fields and the bustling activity of neighbors preparing for the harvest season, his thoughts were a tapestry of hope and vigilance. He understood that the battle for the soul of the community would not be won in a single day or with a single act of defiance. It would be the culmination of countless small, deliberate actions, each one a stitch in the fabric of a resilient society. Thus, as Crestwood Hills emerged from the long winter and embraced the transformative power of spring, the narrative of survival and resistance continued to unfold. The land, vibrant and ever-changing, became both a symbol and a battleground, a place where the determination of a humble farmer and the collective will of a community could stand against the encroaching forces of darkness. In the interplay of light and shadow, of renewal and resistance, Jack Mercer's legacy grew ever stronger, woven into the very essence of the soil and the hearts of those who believed in a future where freedom and integrity reigned supreme. As summer crept stealthily upon Crestwood Hills, the valley began to reveal the subtle warmth of long-awaited days that seemed to promise both growth and the culmination of hidden plans. The gentle hum of cicadas and the fragrant bloom of wildflowers set a deceptive stage for the simmering tensions that had taken root over the past seasons. Jack Mercer, ever the vigilant guardian of his land and community, found himself drawn deeper into the labyrinth of unfolding intrigue. The fragile peace that had allowed him and his neighbors to nurture life was now shadowed by an unsettling sense that the Nova Consortium was preparing its most audacious maneuver yet. In the days when the sun shone with an almost blinding brilliance, Jack continued his routine of daily inspections, now coupled with more deliberate and careful reconnaissance. Every footfall along the worn dirt paths of his property carried the weight of memories from battles fought in distant lands, and each glance toward the horizon was a silent assessment of the enemy's shifting positions. The transformation of the valley was mirrored not only in the resurgence of nature but in the renewed pulse of hidden operations. The old outbuildings, which once served merely as storage for agricultural tools and seasonal harvest equipment, had been repurposed into discreet watchtowers and relay points for the clandestine network Jack had painstakingly assembled. On a particularly sweltering afternoon, when the heat radiated from the cracked earth in wavering mirages, Jack's instincts, ever attuned to the language of subtle disturbances, alerted him to unusual activity near the western boundary of his estate. A convoy of nondescript, blacked-out vehicles had been spotted converging on a narrow stretch of highway that led toward the heart of the valley. Their arrival was as silent as it was foreboding. The vehicles moved in a well-rehearsed formation that left little room for error. Jack's keen eyes observed the precision of their approach, and he immediately recalled a pattern of maneuvering that he had encountered during covert operations in far more volatile regions. The calculated nature of their movement could not be dismissed as mere chance. It was a deliberate show of force, a statement of intent from an adversary that had grown bolder in its designs. Returning swiftly to his fortified command center, a converted boathouse on the edge of a meandering creek, Jack activated his network of monitors, bringing into view an array of cameras and sensors that had been strategically installed during the seasons of vigilant preparation. Every screen displayed a mosaic of live feeds from various vantage points, each frame a testament to the convergence of modern technology and old-school determination. In the hushed tension of that makeshift war room, Jack began to methodically piece together the movements of the mysterious convoy. With practiced precision, he annotated the digital map spread before him, overlaying real-time data with meticulously recorded intelligence gathered over months. His thoughts raced as he sought to identify any weak links in the adversary's formation, a chink in the armor that could be exploited to turn the tide. The revelations from his analysis were both chilling and galvanizing. The convoy's formation and the timing of their movement indicated that they were not simply there to observe or disrupt, but to establish a forward operating base within the valley, a strategic foothold that would enable the Nova Consortium to extend its influence over the region. Such a move would imperil not only the independence of Crestwood Hills but also the integrity of the broader network of communities that had long relied on mutual cooperation and trust. Jack's pulse quickened at the thought of this incursion into his meticulously cultivated sanctuary. With the precision of a seasoned operator, he initiated a series of countermeasures designed to disrupt the enemy's logistics without exposing the full extent of his own defenses. In the quiet hours that followed, Jack moved stealthily under the cover of fading daylight to the western perimeter of his property. His steps were measured and silent as he navigated the labyrinth of hedgerows, rocky outcrops, and concealed pathways that he had so carefully charted over the years. Every step was a deliberate act of defiance, a reminder that he and his community were far from defenseless. He inspected the hidden barriers and reinforced the natural obstacles that punctuated the landscape, a fallen tree strategically positioned across a narrow trail, a series of sharpened stakes camouflaged beneath a tangle of underbrush. His hands, calloused by years of labor and tempered by the rigors of military service, worked with the precision of a master craftsman, ensuring that every detail of his fortifications was impenetrable. Back at the command center, Jack's trusted network of allies worked in unison to monitor the unfolding situation. The steady beep of a newly installed sensor, the soft murmur of a secure radio transmission, and the distant clatter of data being logged into encrypted files formed a symphony of quiet resistance. The communications, a lifeline to fellow veterans and local patriots, reinforced the conviction that the fight ahead would not be waged by force alone but by the unity and ingenuity of a community determined to preserve its way of life. Among these trusted contacts was a former intelligence analyst whose decades of experience in deciphering encrypted enemy communications had proven invaluable. The analyst's timely insights painted a clearer picture of the consortium's operations, revealing that the convoy's arrival was but the opening move in a broader campaign that aimed to reshape the power dynamics of the region through calculated subversion and strategic infiltration. As dusk settled over Crestwood Hills in a blaze of amber and deep violet hues, the subtle interplay of light and shadow over the rugged terrain imbued the land with an almost otherworldly quality. It was in this twilight that Jack's inner resolve crystallized. He stood at the threshold of his homestead, a silhouette framed by the sinking sun, his gaze fixed upon the horizon where the enemy's vehicles had disappeared into the encroaching gloom. The soft murmur of the creek and the distant call of nocturnal birds provided a stark counterpoint to the steely determination in his eyes. In that quiet moment, the dual nature of his existence, one foot anchored in the simplicity of agrarian life, the other in the calculated complexities of clandestine warfare, became undeniably clear. The following night, under a sky blanketed with countless stars, Jack convened a discreet meeting with his most trusted allies at a secluded barn near the central fields of the valley. The atmosphere was charged with urgency and a shared understanding that every moment was precious. In the low light provided by oil lamps and portable LED arrays, the group meticulously reviewed the latest intelligence. Maps were spread out, marked with new coordinates and potential points of vulnerability in the enemy's plan. Their deliberations were methodical and resolute, each participant contributing insights forged in the crucible of past conflicts and a deep-seated commitment to defend the community at all costs. Without resorting to overt declarations, their actions spoke volumes. They were preparing for an inevitable confrontation with an adversary whose ambition was matched only by its ruthlessness. Plans were drawn up not only to neutralize the immediate threat posed by the convoy but also to preempt any future attempts by the Nova Consortium to entrench its presence. The strategy, refined over countless hours of discussion and analysis, was as elegant as it was daring. It involved a multi-layered approach that combined the art of deception with rapid, targeted strikes designed to sow confusion and undermine the enemy's confidence. The network of local defenders was to be mobilized in a coordinated effort that would utilize both conventional methods and innovative tactics. The aim was clear: to disrupt the enemy's supply lines, seize control of key logistical nodes, and ultimately force the consortium to retreat back into the shadows from which it had emerged. As the meeting drew to a close, Jack took a solitary moment to reflect on the magnitude of the task ahead. The weight of responsibility pressed upon him. He was not only the guardian of his land but the embodiment of the community's hope and resilience. The memories of past operations, of nights spent in the belly of enemy territory and the razor-thin margins between survival and defeat, surged within him, reinforcing his determination to prevail. He knew that the forthcoming days would test every facet of his character and every ounce of the strength that his allies and he had painstakingly nurtured over the years. In the days that followed, preparations were executed with surgical precision. Under the cloak of early morning mist and twilight shadows, covert teams were dispatched to critical locations across the valley. They established observation posts in abandoned silos, repurposed old farmhouses into temporary command centers, and even used the natural topography, a series of rolling hills and dense clusters of oak trees, to their strategic advantage. Every measure was taken to ensure that when the time came, the enemy would find themselves ensnared in a web of resistance that was as resilient as it was unpredictable. The local population, though largely unaware of the full scale of the covert operations unfolding in their midst, began to notice subtle changes. Neighbors exchanged knowing glances and quiet assurances, while local businesses discreetly supported the efforts by providing resources and safe havens. The unity that had long been a hallmark of Crestwood Hills became even more palpable, a silent, unspoken force that bound every resident together in the face of an impending threat. Amid the communal resilience, Jack's leadership shone like a beacon, a testament to the enduring spirit of a man who had once trod the perilous paths of war and now fought to preserve the sanctity of home. As midsummer approached and the heat of the day gave way to cooler, starlit nights, the stage was set for the next act in this unfolding drama. The Nova Consortium's convoy, unaware that its every move was being shadowed by a network of determined defenders, had established a temporary camp at a critical juncture along the western highway. Their presence, once an ominous promise of future conflict, now represented the catalyst for a bold counteroffensive. With every passing moment, the tension escalated, a charged silence that spoke of the imminent clash between two forces, one determined to impose its will through subterfuge and might, and the other united by the timeless values of freedom, community, and the unyielding bond between a man and his land. In the quiet before the storm, as the valley held its breath and the distant rumble of engines blended with the nocturnal chorus of crickets and owls, Jack Mercer stood as the steadfast sentinel of Crestwood Hills. The story of that summer was being written in actions as deliberate and enduring as the ancient hills that had witnessed countless seasons of change. Each measured step, each carefully orchestrated maneuver, was a pledge to protect the simple, yet profound, truth that the spirit of a community, when united, could overcome even the most formidable adversary. And so, with resolve etched into every line of his weathered face and determination burning in his eyes, Jack prepared to lead his people into the uncertain dawn of a confrontation that would test the very limits of courage and unity. As the relentless days of summer began their gradual descent toward the golden hues of early autumn, the simmering tensions in Crestwood Hills reached a fevered pitch. The valley, still basking in the remnants of summer's warmth, now braced itself for the inevitable collision between the united local resistance and the stealthy machinations of the Nova Consortium. Jack Mercer, whose life had become a continuous vigil over his beloved land, sensed that the approaching season would herald not only the change of weather but a shift in the balance of power, a moment when the hidden strategies and covert maneuvers of both sides would converge in a decisive confrontation. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the horizon barely whispered of light, Jack rose with the deliberate precision of a man who had long since internalized the rhythm of caution and readiness. His breath, visible in the cool pre-dawn air, carried the weight of innumerable memories from past operations, each one a silent echo of battles fought and won. With steady hands, he reviewed the latest influx of intelligence gathered from his network of steadfast allies, messages encrypted in layers of coded brevity that spoke of unusual movements near the periphery of the valley. The details, though sparse in description, painted a clear picture. The Nova Consortium had escalated their activities, and a coordinated push was imminent. The command center, now a fortified annex within an old converted silo that overlooked the central expanse of the valley, hummed with quiet urgency. Multiple screens displayed live feeds from an array of strategically positioned cameras, each capturing a slice of the terrain with an almost haunting clarity. On one monitor, a series of infrared images revealed figures moving with a deliberateness that suggested military training. On another, data from a newly installed drone feed flickered across the display, a silent witness to activities in a nearby abandoned warehouse, a suspected staging ground for the enemy's operatives. Every piece of information was meticulously logged in a leather-bound journal that Jack had maintained through the long months of escalating tension. The journal was as much a record of time as it was a testament to the enduring resolve of a man whose dual life was now inseparable from the fate of his community. Outside, the valley itself appeared to hold its breath. The familiar fields of Crestwood Hills, once a vibrant tapestry of ripening crops and bustling activity, now seemed to be transformed into a solemn arena awaiting the next act in a high-stakes drama. In the distance, the silhouettes of hills softened by early morning mist loomed like ancient sentinels. The rustle of wind in the tall grasses was joined by the soft murmur of voices, neighbors discreetly exchanging information, a quiet murmur of solidarity in the face of impending danger. The unity that had grown among the local residents, once only a hopeful undercurrent, now had taken on a palpable intensity. Every farmer, every shopkeeper, every schoolteacher carried an unspoken understanding that the valley's future was at stake. Jack's mind was a hive of calculated thoughts as he assembled a final roster of trusted operatives. Among them were seasoned veterans, local law enforcement officers who had long since abandoned conventional methods in favor of community-based defense, and a cadre of young volunteers whose eyes burned with the determination of those who had too much to lose. They gathered in the shadow of an old barn that had been repurposed as a discreet briefing room, its walls lined with maps, charts, and tactical diagrams. The group's formation was informal yet resolute, an assembly bound together by the shared conviction that unity was the greatest weapon against an enemy that thrived on division and subterfuge. In that room, illuminated by the soft glow of portable lanterns and the intermittent flicker of a projector showing satellite images of the region, the strategy was laid out in measured, hushed tones. The plan was multifaceted: to disrupt the enemy's supply lines, to sever their communication nodes, and, ultimately, to force the Nova Consortium's operatives into a trap from which there could be no easy escape. The blueprint of the valley was studied with the careful scrutiny of a chess master, each route of approach and every natural barrier identified and catalogued for its potential use. Every tree, every creek, every abandoned structure became a tactical asset, a potential vantage point or a haven for ambush. The discussions that ensued were imbued with the gravity of impending conflict. There was no place for bravado in that room, only the measured resolve of individuals who had seen the darker side of human ambition. They spoke of coordinated diversions, of feints meant to mislead the enemy into believing that the local resistance was fragmented, and of sudden, concentrated strikes aimed at disrupting the enemy's momentum. Jack's eyes, dark and resolute beneath the brim of his weathered cap, flickered with a quiet intensity as he outlined the final phase of their counteroffensive. His voice, though steady and measured, carried the weight of command, a reminder that every decision, every calculated risk, was a step toward safeguarding a way of life that had been nurtured over generations. Outside, the day began to break with a tentative clarity. The golden rays of early morning sunlight spilled over the horizon, casting long shadows that danced across the rugged terrain. The first hints of autumn, coppery leaves clinging stubbornly to ancient oaks, underscored the transient nature of peace in Crestwood Hills. As Jack stepped out of the command center to survey the awakening landscape, he felt the unspoken burden of leadership. His gaze swept over fields now bathed in a gentle light, fields that had once promised bountiful harvests but now served as silent witnesses to the strategic maneuvers unfolding in secret. Each rustle in the underbrush, each distant clatter of machinery, was a potential harbinger of the enemy's next move. In the hours that followed, coordinated actions were set in motion. Covert teams, each composed of individuals whose lives had been irrevocably altered by the harsh realities of conflict, began to disperse into the valley. Some moved along the narrow paths that wove between orchards and abandoned silos, while others navigated the labyrinthine back roads that connected the scattered homesteads. Their objective was singular: to intercept the enemy's reinforcements before they could coalesce into a formidable force. Under the veil of pre-dawn shadows, these teams communicated in terse, code-laden messages over secure channels, a language honed by years of clandestine operations and a shared commitment to the safety of Crestwood Hills. Amidst the orchestrated chaos of mobilization, Jack found a brief moment of solitude. Standing at the edge of a weathered stone wall that had once defined the boundary of his property, he looked out over the valley with a mixture of nostalgia and steely determination. The land had been his refuge and his battleground, a place where the echoes of past glories and the whispers of future conflicts intermingled. In that moment of reflective silence, memories of his time in the service, of distant lands, unforgiving deserts, and bitter winter nights spent in enemy territory, merged with the present struggle. Every scar on his weathered face was a testament to battles fought, each a reminder that the price of peace was often paid in blood and perseverance. The air, crisp and laced with the scent of impending change, carried the murmurs of nature as well as the subtle undercurrents of human resolve. The birds, whose songs had long been a soothing counterpoint to the tensions of rural life, now seemed to sing with a note of defiant urgency. Even the wind, which had once caressed the fields in gentle, unthreatening whispers, now carried a charge that spoke of oncoming storms. Jack knew that the enemy, too, was poised for action, a calculated, well-timed assault designed to catch the community off guard and to shatter the fragile unity that had been painstakingly built. As the morning advanced, the first coordinated maneuvers of the local resistance were set into motion. A team led by a seasoned ex-specialist moved silently toward a key intersection along the western approach, a choke point where the enemy's convoy was expected to pass. With practiced precision, they planted discreet devices designed to disrupt communications and disable critical vehicles without causing collateral harm. The devices, compact yet potent, were a fusion of modern technology and time-tested ingenuity, a symbol of the resourcefulness that had become the hallmark of Crestwood Hills resistance. Every technician, every operator involved in the operation was acutely aware of the stakes. This was not merely an exercise in sabotage, but a decisive action that could tip the scales in the impending confrontation. Meanwhile, other teams dispersed to secure secondary positions along the valley's natural defensive lines. They reactivated hidden sensors along forgotten roads, patched together surveillance networks using both digital and analog equipment, and prepared a series of contingencies should the enemy attempt to breach the fortified perimeter. In quiet, methodical fashion, the community transformed into an intricate tapestry of defense, a living, breathing network of vigilant citizens whose every action was a thread in the larger fabric of resistance. The Nova Consortium, with its slick modernity and ruthless ambition, was about to encounter a force that had been forged in the crucible of decades of hardship and honed by the unyielding spirit of rural life. As midday approached and the valley was bathed in the full light of a clear autumn sky, Jack Mercer returned to his command center to review the status of the operations. The monitors flickered with streams of real-time data, each image and numerical readout a silent testament to the community's readiness. There was a sense of calm determination in the measured pace of every transmitted update, a quiet assurance that despite the looming threat, the defenders of Crestwood Hills were prepared to meet it head-on. Jack's fingers traced the contours of a map spread out before him, his eyes lingering on points marked with red ink, potential hotspots where the enemy's forces might converge. The convergence of intelligence, preparation, and an indomitable will was palpable in every detail of that room. In the final hours before dusk, as shadows lengthened and the first chill of autumn began to permeate the air, the stage was set for the decisive phase of the impending conflict. Jack's final instructions were transmitted in a series of concise, code-laden messages, a language refined by years of covert operations, where every word carried both a literal and symbolic meaning. The message was clear: the time for passive vigilance was over. The enemy would soon be forced into the open, and when that moment arrived, every man, woman, and child who had lent their strength to the defense of Crestwood Hills would be part of a united front that would repel the encroaching darkness. Standing at the threshold of his homestead as twilight descended, Jack allowed himself one final moment of quiet reflection. The landscape before him, bathed in the soft, melancholy light of dusk, was a vivid reminder of all that was at stake: the enduring legacy of a community, the sanctity of a land that had nurtured generations, and the unyielding spirit of a man who had dedicated his life to the cause of freedom. In that moment, every hardship endured, every scar borne, and every silent prayer offered in the dead of night coalesced into a single, unwavering resolve. The battle for Crestwood Hills was imminent, and though the night ahead promised uncertainty and peril, it also held the possibility of a new dawn, a dawn in which the light of unity and the strength of community would triumph over the machinations of an enemy driven by avarice and ruthlessness. Thus, as the valley braced itself for the approaching storm of conflict, the stage was set for a confrontation that would test the mettle of every soul within Crestwood Hills. Jack Mercer, standing as the steadfast sentinel of his land, embodied the hope and resilience of a community that had long defied the odds. In the fading light of autumn's early evening, the valley exhaled a silent, determined breath, a promise that no matter the darkness that lay ahead, the spirit of the land, and the people who called it home, would endure. As twilight deepened into an inky dusk, the valley of Crestwood Hills transformed into a theater of hushed anticipation and silent resolve. The air carried a palpable charge, a blend of autumn's crisp chill and the collective heartbeat of a community poised on the brink of confrontation. Jack Mercer, whose every step had become a calculated measure of determination, surveyed the darkened expanse from a ridge overlooking the western approach. From this elevated vantage point, the myriad twinkling lights of enemy vehicles and the scattered glimmers of hidden operatives appeared as constellations mapped out in deliberate formation. The moment had arrived for the long-prepared resistance to act, and each passing second reverberated with the gravity of impending conflict. In the encroaching darkness, coordinated signals were exchanged among the network of local defenders. The steady murmur of encrypted communications punctuated the quiet, as each operative, armed with both modern gadgets and the instincts honed in decades of service, reported their positions and verified that every contingency was in place. Along the narrow winding roads and through the labyrinth of wooded clearings, teams moved silently, their steps light on the dewy ground. The enemy, confident in their armored formations and technological prowess, had yet to realize that every advance was being countered by an intricate web of local vigilance. Jack's own team, a mosaic of veterans, seasoned local lawmen, and community volunteers, had converged upon key strategic nodes. They had fortified natural choke points, rigged ambushes along familiar paths, and prepared a series of diversions to scatter the enemy's cohesion. At the heart of the valley, beneath a moon that shone with an almost prophetic clarity, the first phase of the counteroffensive began. In a coordinated burst of activity, a selected group of operatives advanced to disrupt the enemy's communications hub, a nondescript warehouse that had, until that moment, served as the nerve center for the Nova Consortium's local operations. Using precision and stealth that recalled the most critical moments of past covert missions, they infiltrated the perimeter and deployed compact electronic jammers. The sudden loss of radio chatter sent ripples of confusion through the enemy ranks, as signals faltered and encrypted channels went silent. It was a blow delivered with surgical precision, one that confirmed the enemy's miscalculation of the valley's defenders. Elsewhere, along the serpentine back roads that wound through clusters of weathered farmhouses and abandoned silos, another contingent of local forces had enacted a diversion. They set in motion a series of controlled explosions, not meant to cause catastrophic damage, but to simulate the onset of a major breach. The orchestrated detonations resonated through the still night, echoing off the rocky outcrops and shrouding the area in a thick pall of smoke. The sudden cacophony served to disorient the enemy's advance, forcing their armored convoy to slow, recalibrate, and reassess the situation. In that brief window of chaos, the defenders seized the opportunity to tighten their grip on critical routes, intercepting enemy reinforcements before they could fully coalesce. Back at his command center, nestled within the fortified walls of the old silo, Jack meticulously tracked every flicker on his monitors. Each image, each snippet of intercepted data, was a thread in the complex tapestry of the evening's operations. His eyes, reflecting both the weight of countless memories and the steely resolve of a man who had faced down insurmountable odds before, absorbed the unfolding events with a measured calm. Despite the urgency of the moment, there was an almost serene focus in his demeanor, a deep understanding that every action, every calculated risk, was an investment in the future of Crestwood Hills. The enemy, reeling from the initial disruptions, began to reassemble with a frenzied urgency. Their armored vehicles, now appearing less coordinated and more reactive, attempted to regroup along a secondary highway. Yet, the defenders had anticipated such a maneuver. Along this alternate route, concealed teams waited in ambush beneath the dense canopy of ancient oaks. As the enemy convoy crept into the narrow corridor, the ambush was sprung, well-placed incendiary charges and makeshift barricades halted their progress, igniting a flurry of controlled chaos. The clash of metal, the staccato rhythm of rapid-fire exchanges, and the distant cries of disoriented operatives blended into a symphony of conflict that rippled across the valley. In the midst of the unfolding battle, Jack himself moved through the darkness with the practiced ease of a man for whom the terrain was as familiar as the lines on his weathered hands. He navigated through narrow, winding paths to assess critical points, offering silent guidance via secure channels and coordinating the fragmented efforts of the defenders. Every encounter with the enemy, a brief skirmish at a hidden outpost, a silent exchange of fire along a ridge, was meticulously noted and incorporated into an evolving tactical mosaic. The engagement was not one of indiscriminate violence, but a series of calculated strikes aimed at neutralizing the enemy's capacity for sustained offense. As the confrontation reached its zenith, the valley itself became an active participant in the resistance. The natural landscape, its rocky outcrops, dense thickets, and meandering streams, provided both cover and a means of disorientation for the invading forces. The defenders used every asset at their disposal, a hidden cable strung across a narrow pass, a hastily camouflaged pit trap beneath a layer of fallen leaves, and even the strategic timing of local environmental factors, such as a sudden gust of wind that scattered dust and debris. Each element of nature was woven into the fabric of their resistance, turning Crestwood Hills into an organic fortress where every shadow and whisper of the wind carried tactical significance. In the final throes of the skirmish, as the night deepened and the chaos of battle ebbed into a tense lull, the enemy's presence began to dissipate. Their initial momentum, shattered by the coordinated strikes and ambushes, forced them into a hasty retreat. The defenders, though exhausted and bearing the marks of a hard-fought engagement, maintained their composure. The valley, scarred yet unbowed by the night's conflict, stood as a testament to the enduring spirit of its people. In the silent aftermath, amid the lingering haze of smoke and the soft murmurs of reassembled communications, a profound stillness settled over Crestwood Hills, a fragile interlude between the echoes of battle and the uncertain promise of what was to come. Jack Mercer, standing amidst the quiet ruins of disrupted enemy camps and the subtle remnants of orchestrated diversions, allowed himself a moment of reflective solitude. The weight of his past, a lifetime marked by the ceaseless pursuit of peace and the harsh necessity of conflict, intermingled with the present resolve to protect the sanctity of his home. Each scar, each memory of distant battlefields, reaffirmed his belief that the strength of a community was forged not in the absence of strife, but in the ability to rise, together, against overwhelming odds. In that prolonged silence, punctuated only by the distant hum of repair crews mobilizing to secure strategic points and the quiet conversations among resolute neighbors, Crestwood Hills stood united. The brief but intense clash had proven that the valley's defenders were not merely a collection of isolated individuals, but a cohesive force capable of repelling even the most calculated incursions. And while the night remained cloaked in uncertainty, it was also illuminated by the unyielding determination of those who refused to surrender their land, their legacy, and the simple truth that freedom was worth every sacrifice. In the wake of the night's fierce encounter, Crestwood Hills slowly exhaled a collective breath of temporary relief. Dawn arrived with an almost surreal calm, a deceptive quiet that blanketed the valley in the soft, golden light of early morning. The embers of recent conflict still glowed faintly among the scattered remnants of enemy encampments, their smoke trails now mere wisps dissolving into the clear sky. Amid the tranquil awakening, Jack Mercer moved deliberately through the ravaged outskirts of his domain. His eyes scanning the horizon with both satisfaction and wariness. The residue of the battle lay not only in the charred husks of vehicles and hastily abandoned gear but in the intricate network of tactical adjustments that had been etched into the land itself. Every carefully placed obstacle, every hastily camouflaged diversion, bore silent testimony to the resilience of the valley's defenders. In the early hours, while the valley still held the fragile stillness of recovery, Jack convened with his core group in a secure, repurposed barn that had withstood the tumult of the night. The interior of the barn, its walls lined with faded posters of past glories and the scars of previous conflicts, had become a makeshift war room where maps and digital feeds merged seamlessly with handwritten notes and coded transmissions. The team, a mosaic of experienced veterans and impassioned local volunteers, gathered around a large oak table. In the dim light provided by battery-powered lanterns, they reviewed the unfolding aftermath of the assault, each member offering insights derived from their roles on the field. The conversation was measured and deliberate, punctuated by moments of silent reflection as the team assessed the enemy's tactics and the vulnerabilities that had nearly allowed the incursion to gain a foothold. The intercepted communications, now decrypted and painstakingly analyzed by the veteran intelligence analyst in their midst, painted a picture of a larger, more complex strategy. The Nova Consortium, it appeared, had been orchestrating a series of calculated diversions not merely to test the defenses of Crestwood Hills, but to fragment the regional resistance and establish strategic supply corridors in neighboring areas. Their objective was insidious: to slowly erode the autonomy of communities through a combination of economic subversion and covert militaristic maneuvers. Jack listened intently as his team outlined the next steps. There was a consensus that while the night's victory was significant, it was but one battle in a much larger war, a war where every small defeat for the enemy compounded into a broader erosion of their ambitions. The plan was multifaceted. Immediate efforts would focus on reinforcing the compromised points along the valley's perimeter. Discrete patrols would be established at key crossroads to intercept any remnants of enemy forces attempting to regroup. Simultaneously, a network of clandestine communications would be expanded to include not only local operatives but also allies in adjacent communities. It was a strategy aimed at both defense and the gradual consolidation of intelligence, a subtle yet powerful counteroffensive designed to disrupt the enemy's long-term plans. Outside the barn, the valley itself began its slow return to life. The chill of early autumn was tempered by the gentle warmth of the rising sun, and the once silent fields now stirred with activity as local farmers emerged from their nocturnal vigilance to tend to their land. Yet, there was an unmistakable undercurrent of resolve woven through the routine tasks of daily life. Neighbors exchanged nods of solidarity in passing, and even the local cafe buzzed with murmured discussions of recent events, a shared acknowledgement that while normalcy might return on the surface, the battle for the soul of Crestwood Hills was far from over. Jack spent the following days traversing the valley, not as a solitary sentinel but as a leader intent on understanding the depth of the enemy's encroachment. He visited the boundary posts where his operatives had set up temporary outposts, scrutinizing the integrity of their defenses and offering subtle adjustments born from decades of field experience. His presence, calm, resolute, and unyielding, infused the local resistance with a renewed sense of purpose. In his measured interactions with the townspeople, whether during a quiet conversation at a weather general store or while inspecting a newly repaired fence line, there was a palpable reminder that the strength of Crestwood Hills lay not only in its physical defenses but in the collective will of its inhabitants. Amid this period of consolidation, Jack also took time to reflect on the broader implications of the ongoing struggle. The battle had served as a stark reminder that the enemy was not a faceless, monolithic force but a network of individuals driven by a ruthless ambition to rewrite the rules of engagement in rural America. The Nova Consortium's tactics, carefully balancing overt military might with covert economic infiltration, were designed to destabilize communities gradually, undermining their social fabric from within. This realization spurred a shift in strategy among Jack's inner circle. They began to explore ways to bolster not just the immediate physical defenses but also the long-term resilience of the community. Plans were set in motion for comprehensive community outreach initiatives, aimed at educating local leaders on the subtle dangers of economic and bureaucratic manipulation. Workshops, discreetly organized under the guise of routine town meetings, sought to empower residents with knowledge and tools to detect and resist any form of subversion. In these gatherings, the conversation often returned to Jack's storied past, a legacy marked by service, sacrifice, and a relentless commitment to the ideals of freedom and self-determination. His reputation as a former Navy SEAL was a source of both inspiration and practical guidance. His recounting of past missions, though carefully veiled in allegory to maintain operational security, resonated deeply with those present. They saw in his eyes the weight of battles fought not just on distant shores, but in the quiet moments when every decision carried the potential to change lives. Through his example, they began to understand that the defense of Crestwood Hills was not a temporary, reactionary measure but a continuous commitment to a way of life built on trust, unity, and the unyielding belief in the power of a community united by shared purpose. As the days turned into weeks, the valley took on a dual character. On one hand, it was a landscape of natural beauty, a rolling mosaic of fields, orchards, and time-worn homesteads basking in the mild glow of autumn. On the other, it was an ever-evolving battlefield where every rustle of wind and every shifting shadow could herald the approach of danger. The contrast was stark and served as a constant reminder of the delicate balance that defined life in Crestwood Hills. Jack's nightly patrols became an almost ritualistic journey, a meditative exploration of the borders of his domain, where he assessed not only the physical integrity of the defenses but also the subtle changes in the behavior of those around him. His seasoned gaze was ever watchful for anomalies, a light flickering in a window where none should be, a vehicle idling on a road typically silent in the early hours, or a whispered conversation that hinted at deeper concerns. In this charged atmosphere, new alliances began to take shape. Representatives from neighboring communities, once isolated in their own struggles, reached out to Jack with proposals for a coordinated regional defense. These informal networks, forged in the crucible of shared adversity, promised to expand the reach of the resistance and create a bulwark against the creeping influence of the Nova Consortium. The idea was simple yet profound, a federation of communities, each safeguarding its local heritage while contributing to a larger, interdependent system of intelligence and mutual aid. For Jack, this vision rekindled memories of his days in service, when the strength of a unit lay in the trust and solidarity of its members. He recognized that the coming days would demand not only tactical brilliance but also a deep, strategic unity that could only be achieved through collaboration and the pooling of resources. Under the deepening sky, as dusk once again approached, Jack returned to his command center to review the progress of the day's efforts. The screens before him, now a collage of live feeds, historical data, and predictive models, spoke of a valley that was adapting, fortifying, and uniting. Every data point was a promise, a quiet testament to the collective resolve of a community that refused to be cowed by a shadowy adversary. In the soft hum of the equipment and the gentle clatter of keyboards, there lay a message of hope, that even in the face of relentless, calculated aggression, the spirit of Crestwood Hills would endure. As night descended once more over the valley, blanketing the land in a mantle of deep blue and silver, Jack Mercer allowed himself a brief moment of solitude on a weathered porch overlooking the fields. The cool night air carried with it the distant murmur of nocturnal creatures and the soft, persistent rustle of leaves, a lullaby that belied the tensions of the hours past. In that quiet space between vigilance and repose, Jack reflected on the profound truth that had come to define his existence, that the defense of one's home was not merely a matter of physical fortification but of nurturing an unbreakable bond among those who called it home. And so, with resolve tempered by experience and hope rekindled by unity, the valley of Crestwood Hills prepared itself for the uncertain days ahead, a living testament to the enduring strength of a community bound by the courage of its convictions. As autumn deepened into a season of brooding transition, Crestwood Hills braced itself for the inevitable climax of its long, covert struggle. The days shortened, and a cool, persistent wind swept over the valley, a constant reminder that nature, in all its relentless cycles, held the power to both nurture and challenge. For Jack Mercer, each new morning was both a renewal of hope and a call to arms, a reaffirmation that every season brought with it a fresh opportunity to defend the sacred legacy of his home. The recent successes and hard-won victories had fortified the community's resolve, but they had also revealed the stark reality that the enemy's ambitions were far from spent. The Nova Consortium, reeling from the coordinated ambushes and tactical diversions, had retreated temporarily into the shadows, only to regroup and recalibrate their designs with a renewed ferocity. During these tense days, Jack found himself at the nexus of strategic planning and practical necessity. The Resistance's efforts had evolved from reactive measures into an organized, proactive campaign. The network of allies, once a scattered collection of local operatives, had coalesced into a formidable regional alliance, a mosaic of farmers, retired law enforcement, former military personnel, and local leaders who had come to see the struggle as a fight not only for land but for the very soul of their communities. In secret meetings held in refurbished basements, abandoned grain silos, and even in the back rooms of small-town diners, they exchanged intelligence, coordinated patrol routes, and devised plans that blended conventional tactics with ingenious subterfuge. Jack's command center, now an expansive annex within an old stone barn fortified with modern technology and aged resolve, buzzed with ceaseless activity. Monitors displayed a myriad of data streams, satellite images highlighting enemy positions along the periphery, infrared feeds capturing movements in the dense woodlands, and detailed schematics of the valley overlaid with strategic annotations. Every piece of information was scrutinized, every anomaly dissected with the precision of a man who had learned that in the art of war, even the slightest deviation could herald a turning point. The ledger of intercepted communications grew thicker with cryptic messages, fragments of plans, hints of new tactics, and subtle references to the next phase that sent shivers down the spines of even the most stalwart defenders. In one particularly charged meeting, held in the hushed intimacy of a repurposed community hall, Jack addressed the assembled group. His presence, marked by a quiet intensity and the unmistakable air of someone who had long traversed the thin line between peace and conflict, lent gravitas to every word he spoke. The discussion turned to a series of recent incidents that had raised alarming questions about the enemy's strategy. Reports had emerged of coordinated efforts by the Nova Consortium to infiltrate local institutions, banking systems, municipal offices, and even educational establishments, with the dual aim of sowing discord and gaining access to sensitive information. These maneuvers, though subtle, threatened to undermine the social fabric that held the communities together. Jack's gaze swept over the faces of those gathered, each one a testament to the resilience born of shared adversity, and he spoke of the need to fortify not only physical defenses but also the trust that bound the people. Across the valley, preparations for the enemy's anticipated counteroffensive were taking shape. Jack had long suspected that the Nova Consortium's retreat was but a temporary lull, a strategic pause during which they would rearm, reposition, and ultimately launch a decisive assault aimed at crippling the burgeoning resistance. The intelligence collected over the past weeks suggested that the enemy was amassing forces at a remote crossroads near the eastern boundary, a location chosen for its strategic value and relative isolation from the main population centers. In a carefully orchestrated operation, reconnaissance teams had confirmed the presence of new, more sophisticated vehicles, armored personnel carriers equipped with the latest in surveillance and combat technology were now a common sight on unmarked highways leading toward the valley. This quiet buildup set the stage for an engagement that promised to be as decisive as it was deadly. In the days leading up to the expected offensive, Jack and his inner circle implemented a series of bold, preemptive maneuvers designed to disrupt the enemy's preparations. Under the cover of pre-dawn darkness, elite teams, drawn from the ranks of both seasoned veterans and rigorously trained local volunteers, were dispatched to key positions along the eastern boundary. Their mission was twofold: to intercept and dismantle the enemy's logistical networks and to sow confusion within their ranks by launching surprise raids on supply depots and communication hubs. These operations were executed with the silent efficiency of a well-rehearsed drill, their success measured not in the immediate spectacle of violence but in the strategic paralysis they inflicted upon the Nova Consortium's advance. In one daring raid at an abandoned service station repurposed as a covert storage facility, the defenders disabled several critical vehicles and disrupted a cache of high-grade communications equipment, sending a clear message that no part of the valley would be left undefended. Yet, even as the resistance tightened its grip on the physical borders of Crestwood Hills, the battle for hearts and minds continued on a more subtle front. Jack spearheaded a series of community initiatives aimed at reinforcing the social bonds that had long been the cornerstone of rural life. In small gatherings held in the warm glow of family kitchens and local meeting halls, he and his trusted advisors disseminated practical advice on recognizing and countering infiltration attempts, not merely those involving armed operatives, but also the insidious forms of economic manipulation and bureaucratic coercion that threatened to undermine the community's autonomy. Through discreet workshops and the distribution of carefully worded newsletters, the residents of Crestwood Hills were urged to remain vigilant in every aspect of their daily lives. The message was clear: the true strength of the valley lay not solely in its physical defenses, but in the unbreakable solidarity of its people. On a crisp, clear evening as the last vestiges of daylight faded, Jack found himself once again alone on the ridge overlooking the valley. From this vantage point, the sweeping panorama of Crestwood Hills revealed a land both serene and defiant, a tapestry of golden fields, winding roads, and clusters of sturdy homes that had stood as bastions of hope through countless trials. The cool wind carried whispers of the coming storm, and the rustling leaves seemed to murmur prophecies of conflict. In that solitary moment of reflection, Jack's thoughts drifted to the many chapters of his own life, to the distant battlefields where he had first learned the cost of freedom, to the quiet moments of introspection that had followed victories and losses alike, and to the promise of redemption that lay in the collective courage of those who had chosen to stand together. As the anticipated day of reckoning loomed ever closer, a palpable tension settled over the valley like a shroud. The enemy's forces, now bristling with the confidence of a group that believed itself unstoppable, began to stir with renewed urgency. Secure channels lit up with coded alerts, a silent, digital drumbeat heralding the start of what could only be described as the next phase of the conflict. Jack's command center became a hive of activity, with every operative working in near-silent synchronization. The screens displayed a mosaic of maps and live feeds that tracked enemy movements with unnerving accuracy. Every intercepted message, every flicker on a monitor, was dissected with the meticulous care of a seasoned strategist determined to preempt the enemy's every move. Then, in the early hours of a bitter autumn morning, the signal came, a definitive alert that the enemy's assault was imminent. The quiet before the storm broke as a series of coordinated transmissions swept across the resistance network. In response, Jack gave the order, and like a tide unleashed from a dam, the defenders surged into action. Along the eastern boundary, hidden teams advanced with quiet determination, positioning themselves at key choke points and readying their defensive measures. Across the valley, vehicles loaded with makeshift armored reinforcements rolled silently along secondary roads, their presence a stark counterpoint to the looming threat. Every movement was precise, every decision weighed against the high stakes of a confrontation that would test the very mettle of Crestwood Hills. The ensuing hours unfolded with the relentless pace of a well-oiled machine set into motion by the inexorable force of necessity. The enemy's approach, which had been a silent menace just moments before, burst forth with the roar of heavy engines and the glare of searchlights slicing through the pre-dawn darkness. Armored vehicles and tactical teams poured into the valley along the eastern corridor, their formation a study in disciplined aggression. Yet, as they advanced, they encountered a series of calculated obstacles, ambushes expertly orchestrated by local forces, surprise detonations that disrupted their formations, and a network of fortified positions that had been prepared with the kind of meticulous planning that only years of experience could yield. In the chaotic ballet of movement and counter-movement, the battle for Crestwood Hills reached its crescendo. Explosions punctuated the air with bursts of light and sound as the enemy's advance was met by the explosive force of the defenders' preemptive strikes. The valley, once a quiet haven of pastoral life, transformed into a dynamic theater of conflict, a place where every tree, every rock, every furrowed field became part of an intricate tapestry of warfare. Jack, moving with the assured grace of a man who had spent his life dancing on the edge of danger, navigated through the fray with an unwavering focus. His presence was a rallying beacon for the resistance, even as he directed his operatives through secure channels and coordinated tactical adjustments in real time. His eyes never strayed from the horizon, where the enemy's formation pressed forward like an unyielding tide. Throughout the prolonged engagement, the spirit of Crestwood Hills was laid bare. The defenders, driven by a blend of duty and deep-rooted love for their land, fought not only for territory but for the very essence of their collective identity. In the chaos of gunfire and the tumult of shifting allegiances, every act of defiance, every successful disruption of enemy communications, every thwarted attempt to seize a strategic point, served as a declaration that the community's legacy was not for sale, not to be trampled underfoot by those who sought only power and profit. And as the enemy's initial momentum faltered under the relentless onslaught of local ingenuity, a profound realization took root among the resistance, that true strength lay in unity, in the steadfast conviction that together, they could withstand even the most formidable adversary. As the morning wore on and the first rays of sunlight began to dispel the darkness, the enemy's forces, battered and disoriented by the unanticipated ferocity of the counteroffensive, started to reel. Communications grew sporadic, and the once cohesive formations began to fracture under the pressure of constant, coordinated strikes. In one pivotal moment, a key enemy convoy, attempting to regroup and retreat through a narrow defile flanked by steep, wooded slopes, was caught in a well-planned ambush. Explosive charges, set with precision and triggered remotely, shattered the convoy's formation, scattering armored vehicles and leaving the enemy scrambling for cover. The resulting disarray sent shockwaves through the entire force, a moment that confirmed what Jack had long suspected, that the tide of battle was turning in favor of Crestwood Hills. In the aftermath of this critical engagement, as silence gradually reclaimed the battered landscape, Jack Mercer stood amidst the ruins of the enemy's assault with a profound sense of both relief and sober responsibility. The valley bore the scars of conflict, smoldering craters, damaged fortifications, and the lingering echoes of explosive force, but it also shone with the indomitable light of a community that had refused to yield. The resistance had not vanquished the enemy entirely, but it had forced them into a hasty, disorderly retreat, buying precious time for the defenders to regroup and fortify their positions further. In the ensuing hours, as medics moved swiftly to tend to the wounded and engineers began the painstaking work of assessing and repairing damaged defenses, a new sense of cautious optimism began to permeate Crestwood Hills. Jack's command center buzzed with activity as detailed after-action reports were compiled, intelligence was gathered from the field, and plans for future countermeasures were refined. The battle had been hard-fought, and the scars it left behind were a solemn reminder of the cost of freedom, yet there was also an undeniable sense of victory, a victory defined not solely by territorial gains but by the reaffirmation of a community's enduring spirit. In a final moment of reflective solitude that afternoon, as the valley slowly returned to a state of tense calm, Jack stood at the edge of a weathered stone wall overlooking the fields. The distant hum of recovery efforts blended with the soft murmur of the wind, and he allowed himself a brief, measured exhale, a quiet acknowledgement that the struggle was far from over, yet that hope, forged in the fires of adversity, would continue to burn brightly in Crestwood Hills. His gaze swept over the land, a tapestry of scars and triumphs interwoven into the very fabric of the earth, and in that silent communion with the valley, Jack understood that the true battle was not fought solely on the field of combat but in the hearts and minds of those who chose to stand together against the darkness. As the sun rose on a crisp morning in late autumn, the valley of Crestwood Hills awoke to a renewed sense of purpose and quiet determination. The previous day's tumult had left its imprint on the land, a patchwork of scorched earth and newly mended defenses, each scar a silent testament to the struggle fought and the sacrifices made. Jack Mercer, the steadfast guardian whose weathered face bore the lines of both past battles and present resolve, surveyed the valley from a high ridge that overlooked his home and the surrounding community. In that moment, the landscape told a story of resilience. Despite the relentless pressure from the Nova Consortium and the deep wounds inflicted by conflict, the land had managed to heal and the people had come together to form an unbreakable bond. In the gentle light of dawn, the familiar rhythm of daily life began to reassert itself across Crestwood Hills. Neighbors emerged from their homes with a cautious optimism, tending to freshly planted fields and repairing weathered fences that had been battered by the recent clashes. The community, which had long thrived on its shared heritage and mutual support, now found itself united by a common cause. Informal meetings took place in the back rooms of local establishments and on the steps of aging community centers, where residents exchanged news and quietly planned for a future free from the shadow of external domination. Amid this collective revival, Jack's influence was unmistakable. His presence had become the linchpin of local resistance, a living embodiment of the ideals of duty, courage, and sacrifice. In the days following the decisive battle, the valley's defenders set about not only consolidating their territorial gains but also addressing the deeper wounds inflicted by the conflict. Under Jack's watchful guidance, a comprehensive strategy was launched to ensure that Crestwood Hills would remain impervious to future incursions. Detailed assessments were made of every vulnerable point along the perimeter, from narrow, wooded passes to abandoned roads that could serve as potential avenues of enemy infiltration. Teams of local volunteers, many of whom had taken up arms alongside retired veterans and former law enforcement officers, worked tirelessly to bolster these defenses. They installed additional surveillance equipment, patched together makeshift barriers using natural resources, and even repurposed old agricultural machinery into mobile checkpoints capable of disrupting enemy movements at a moment's notice. Jack spent long hours in his command center, a repurposed stone barn that now resonated with the hum of digital monitors and the rustle of carefully annotated maps, reviewing intelligence reports and after-action briefings. His journal, a meticulously kept record of every operation and encounter, had grown into a detailed chronicle of the valley's evolution from a quiet hamlet into a bastion of resistance. Each entry was imbued with both the precision of a military log and the poetic cadence of a man who had learned to see beauty in the struggle for freedom. The pages recorded not only tactical details, the locations of ambushes, the timing of enemy maneuvers, the interception of encrypted messages, but also the human stories that had emerged from the chaos. They spoke of neighbors who had risked their lives to warn one another, of young volunteers who had discovered a sense of purpose amid the turmoil, and of a community that had learned to cherish even the smallest victories in the face of overwhelming odds. As the days turned to weeks, the Nova Consortium found itself on the defensive. The enemy's attempts to re-establish a foothold in the region were met with swift, coordinated responses from the newly formed regional alliance. Representatives from neighboring communities, farmers, educators, and local officials who had once considered their struggles separate, now found common ground with Crestwood Hills. Together, they forged an informal federation that extended the network of vigilance and mutual support far beyond the boundaries of any single town. Joint training sessions were organized under the guise of community improvement projects, and secure communication lines were established to facilitate the rapid sharing of intelligence. In quiet moments of collaboration, the leaders of these communities reflected on the importance of unity in an era when conventional lines of defense had all but blurred. Their shared experiences had taught them that the strength of a people lay not solely in their weaponry or fortifications, but in the collective will to stand against injustice and the creeping influence of those who sought to control them through subversion and fear. Under Jack's steady tutelage, this regional alliance began to transform from a reactive force into a proactive movement. Workshops were held in local schools and community centers, where experts, some with backgrounds in intelligence, others with deep roots in the local culture, offered guidance on recognizing and countering the subtle methods of economic manipulation and bureaucratic coercion that had characterized the consortium's earlier maneuvers. Residents learned to scrutinize sudden offers of development, to question unexpected shifts in local policy, and to understand that every transaction carried not only the promise of prosperity but also the potential for subversion. These educational initiatives, delivered in unassuming community gatherings and through discreet newsletters, became a quiet but powerful arm of the resistance. They reaffirmed the belief that safeguarding the legacy of Crestwood Hills meant preserving not only its physical boundaries but also the values and traditions that had long defined its way of life. In the aftermath of the fierce engagements, Jack's own role evolved once again. No longer was he solely the vigilant sentinel on the outskirts of his land, he had become a mentor and an organizer, a living repository of experience and wisdom for the new generation of defenders. His weathered hands, once quick to load a weapon or repair a broken fence, now passed along the lessons of his past to those who had not yet seen the full cost of conflict. In quiet training sessions held at dusk, beneath the fading light of autumn, he demonstrated both the tactical maneuvers that had saved lives and the philosophies that had sustained him through years of hardship. His silent example resonated deeply with the community's youth, farmers' children who had grown up hearing whispered legends of valor and sacrifice, and instilled in them a sense of purpose that transcended the immediate crisis. They began to see themselves not as passive inheritors of a troubled legacy, but as active participants in shaping a future defined by resilience, integrity, and unity. Meanwhile, the Nova Consortium, now forced to contend with the unyielding resistance of a community that refused to be cowed, began to reassess its strategy. Reports of enemy setbacks, captured equipment, and the rapid spread of regional intelligence caused a stir among the consortium's higher echelons. In whispered consultations far from the prying eyes of local informants, they debated the merits of further aggression versus a retreat into the shadows. The failure of their latest operation, once envisioned as a swift and decisive conquest, had revealed the depth of local resolve and the adaptability of grassroots defense. Although the consortium was not entirely vanquished, their ambitions in the region had been severely undermined, and the once assured prospect of a quiet takeover had given way to an uncertain future. For Crestwood Hills, the turning point had been achieved not solely through military might, but through a transformation of the community's spirit, a realization that the true power of resistance lay in the unity of its people. As winter's chill began to edge its way into the autumn air, the valley of Crestwood Hills settled into a new equilibrium, a state that was at once fragile and indomitable. Jack Mercer stood at the boundary of his property one late afternoon, watching as the setting sun bathed the fields in a warm, amber glow. In the distance, the once ominous silhouettes of enemy vehicles had all but vanished, replaced by the simple, enduring scenes of daily life, farmers tending to their crops, children riding bicycles along dusty roads, and elders sharing quiet conversations on weathered porches. Yet, beneath this veneer of peaceful normalcy, there remained an ever-present vigilance, a collective promise that if darkness were to return, the community would once again rise as one. In that final, reflective moment, Jack's thoughts drifted to the long and arduous journey that had brought Crestwood Hills to this point. He recalled the early days of isolation and quiet despair, the gradual awakening of a community that had learned to see beyond the simple rhythms of rural life, and the long nights spent in silent communion with a land that had become both a refuge and a battleground. Every scar etched into the soil, every whispered conversation of hope, every act of defiance had contributed to the legacy that now pulsed through the valley, a legacy built on the unyielding conviction that freedom was a birthright worth fighting for, no matter the cost. Thus, as the final light of day faded into a gentle twilight, Crestwood Hills embraced the promise of a new chapter. It was a chapter written not in the ink of conquest or the blood of endless warfare, but in the quiet determination of ordinary people who had discovered within themselves extraordinary strength. Jack Mercer, ever the sentinel and mentor, turned back toward his farmhouse, a modest abode that had borne witness to both the horrors of conflict and the beauty of rebirth, with the unspoken knowledge that the true victory lay not in the defeat of an enemy, but in the enduring spirit of a community united by love, sacrifice, and hope. And so, beneath a sky slowly painted with the soft hues of approaching night, the valley of Crestwood Hills stood as a living testament to resilience. In its gentle landscapes, in the determined hearts of its people, and in the legacy of a man who had given his all for the land he called home, there burned an eternal flame, a beacon of hope that would forever light the way forward, no matter what challenges the future might hold.